Are you certain you don't want to follow a path? If you don't choose your path, you can learn almost anything that anyone is willing to teach you, but you won't have any guidance outside the Vale.
That's okay.
In that case, I suggest asking the woodcutter to be your mentor while in the Vale.
Does he usually mentor people who haven't chosen a path?
She usually mentors those who wish to become rangers, but anyone in the village could mentor you until you leave the Vale. You can only learn a few basic skills here, but she can talk to birds.
It didn't take Danika long to realize that her mentor, C3.2-4.1, had a much simpler AI than the traveling merchant. The crotchety old NPC conversed with a much more traditional dialogue set, and would apparently repeat what information she knew infinitely if required. The traveling merchant hadn't been joking about learning to fly by falling out of a tree either. Danika's mentor claimed to have asked a falcon she knew about the best way to learn to fly. Apparently, the falcon had recommended kicking the fledgling out of the nest as the best method.
Is there a second best method?
There is, but I don't recommend trying it, little Zip-Zing.
What is it?
Falling from a falcon's claws after flying halfway to the sun, tee-hee-hee. You'd splat like an overripe strawberry if you failed.
Danika agreed to try falling out of trees. She soon discovered that when she jumped off the branch her mentor had placed her on, her wings would beat automatically until she paid attention to them. The fall hurt a little, but not enough to make her afraid to try again. C3.2-4.1 insisted that after the first time, Danika must climb back into the tree on her own. Danika found learning to climb using her claws surprisingly easy, and became quite dexterous at scuttling up the tree. She had to jump out of the tree several dozen times before she caught the trick of flight. Rather than controlling her wings as though she were flapping her arms, it was more like controlling a windshield wiper, learning to turn it on, and then control how fast her wings beat. Controlling her direction was simpler. She simply moved in direction she wished to go. Danika had been practicing flying for about an hour before she realized that thinking about how she was moving was probably the same reason she'd tripped while running. She dropped neatly to the ground and then raced across the clearing. She skidded to a stop and laughed aloud. The controls were the same.
I see you've finally learned how to move around, little Zip-Zing. Well done. Would you like to learn how to look up the controls for other game interface devices?
Danika stared at her mentor for a moment, jarred by the sudden reference to other game interfaces, despite her triumph at mastering the controls here. Sure, she agreed, after her brain adjusted. She looked down and clutched a fist full of dirt in her hand, and then let it fall through her claws. Danika gazed around the clearing again, with new appreciation for how real everything seemed through the VR Medipod interface. Calling up the menu interface turned out to be easy enough, if a little silly. It reminded Danika of the old motion tracking console games, with the way it required assuming a slightly artificial pose. She had to sit up on her hindquarters with one hand raised as if in greeting. After a bit of experimentation, she discovered that it was possible to assume the menu calling pose while hovering in flight, but she really hoped that no one could take a picture of her while she was doing it. Fortunately, once the overlay screens displayed themselves, the pose could be dropped, and the screens were easy to dismiss when finished.